Welcome to People First Builders, celebrating leaders in construction who build success through their people. My name is Fletcher Wimbush, your host. I'm the CEO of Discover.ai, a performance hiring software helping small and mid-sized AEC companies solve their hardest problem, people. We help people first leaders install and execute repeatable talent acquisition systems that drive business results by hiring top performers, lowering turnover, and building world-class company cultures. Stick around to the end and you can learn more about how to become a guest on our podcast and share your story with the world. My name is Fletcher Wimbush. I'm your host. Welcome to the People First Builders podcast. Today, I've got a really special guest, Jenny Nail. She's the Chief Commercial Officer at CRH Americas Building Products. She has a really long and impressive career. And I say this because I started my life at Home Depot, and I have just the utmost respect for the Home Depot world and the quality of people that they attract and develop. And you started out, I think, as a sales associate and worked your way up to an executive level merchandiser. You went off then to start your own business and then ultimately landed at CRH, and then also had a long and varied career and held basically every role in the revenue generation chain that I could imagine looking at your profile. Maybe there's one you missed, I don't know, but now you're driving that across multiple different divisions and business units. I mean, Jenny, I just first add us a little color on, who you guys are now, but your journey, your perspective on your journey. I can only imagine that you have just smashed records and accomplished things that others have not, to be able to have this constant forward progression into more and more challenging and harder roles. And you must have accomplished a lot.
No, I appreciate that. And obviously, incredibly kind words. And it's amazing. Sometimes 25 years just flies by. And it's not often that we take the pause and think about just the journey we've been on. So I appreciate the time and opportunity to talk through it. I love that you opened with the comment of Home Depot, because if we could all be so lucky, I think unbeknownst to me how transformative that would be in my career, but truly was just a college student at University of Georgia looking for a summer job and became a sales associate at Home Depot. And fast forward 13 years, held a variety of roles there. But I think what was really instrumental for me that really shaped me for years to come was just the customer obsession, having that opportunity to be in the aisles, hear the direct feedback, and really start that evolution towards solving customers' problems. So it's amazing how many times I reflect on those days. While it was once just a summer job, it really did set the foundation of how I think about my leadership journey from there on.
What were a couple of leadership things that you took away from your experience at Home Depot that you've carried on to other roles?
Yeah, I think beyond just everything, I mean, customers are the heartbeat of the organization. I think that is quite profound in its simplicity. And I think as I look at CRH as a manufacturer, it's the same sentiment in terms of our operators and our frontline associates are the heartbeat of the organization. And I always think that the closer you can get to the customer, you get tremendous insights on where the problems really sit and where do you need to focus your attention. And so it's engaging and not getting disconnected from those that really matter and transform the business. Other than that, I would say it's just the strength of collaborating. I think one of the most interesting parts of Home Depot is that you're surrounded by such broad skill sets. It's a huge organization, but you have experts across marketing, sales, merchandising, operations, supply chain. And you got to figure out how you pull those groups together and get them working towards really solving customers' problems. And it can be whether it's in a large organization or a small startup. Same level of complexity in its
Yeah.
own way of just how do you get everybody talking and organizing and aligning on the same goals.
And I think that was kind of my experience. Mine was a little different. I grew up in the Bay Area in Northern California, and my stepfather ran the concession stands for all of those. If you ever been to the NorCal Home Depots, there's these like really elaborate concession stands out in front of all of those. I actually built and set up 24 of those for Home Depots out of college across the country, and you know, and that was what same thing that I took away that's where I learned customer service. We were just obsessed about the customer. You know, if they dropped their soda, it was like, no, like, let's clean it up. We get them a new one. Here's like, and give the kid a lollipop while you're at it, like bonus, like, you know, now they're dropping sodas all over the place. No, I mean, but it was like that level of obsession. It's like, we're going to always do whatever's going to make the customer the happiest and solve whatever problem, or, you know, deliver that high level of service. And that's, I think, for me, where this whole idea of like, you know, people first comes in. You know, like, the customer is a person, the people on our teams are people, and we're not actually in the, you know, the building business necessarily. I mean, yes, we sell building products, or we recreate or build things. But at the end of the day, we're there to solve other people's problems across, you know, both the customer and our internal customers, or our people.
So I do love the parallel on that point though, because my first job at Home Depot when I worked in the stores it was the first year that we had access to the John Deere tractors.
Yeah.
And I created the lawnmower rodeo, and I used
Nice.
the parking lot and used our gray block and built a whole little space with cones. And I used to let customers ride the tractors and go through the 10-point inspection and talk about them. And we moved a tremendous amount of tractors, but it was all about getting that touch with the customer, letting them experience the product, and really just listening to the feedback of what they were looking for. So pretty cool that we both started our journeys in the parking lot of a Home Depot.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And there's so many fond memories, you know, there, and so many great leaders. I mean, I just remember some of the branch managers and the regional managers they were just so great. You know, they would come out and they'd buy like lunch for their whole team. And they were just, and they were there with organizations for such long periods of time. And they cared about the performance. They cared about the customers. And I mean, the number of employees that were there for, like, I mean, I was in front of those Home Depots for, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 years of my life. I started when I was 9, hanging out in front of Home Depots. So
Cool.
long time, right? But I mean, these people, like, they're 10, 15-year employees, and the loyalty that they had. And that's all just a reflection of the leadership style, you know, across the organization. But it was true at every store for the most part, right? Sure, there were some stores that maybe were going to transformation, but I mean, I'd say 9 or 8 out of 10 stores would be like, this manager's been here for 5 years, you know, and they have team members who've been there for long time and just loyal as can be. And that was a testament to, you know, I think how well they treated their people, and the opportunities they gave them for growth.
Absolutely. No, and loyalty is something that we all fight for, but you can't demand it. It's a
Yeah.
lot of really small, meaningful investments that make people feel appreciated. You've got to make sure that they feel heard and celebrated, and it's the culmination of all of it. And I think it's why building teams is so important too, because you can have one toxic person that really ruins that for an entire team or organization. So it really is staying in tune with the collective, and how you hire people and who you bring into that culture,
Yeah.
to make sure that it works and that you can continue that path of loyalty and tenure.
And so that's probably a good transition to talk a little bit about, you know, in the pregame with your team, they mentioned that you're involved in like all sorts of hiring decisions for, you know, outside of your department, even, you know, what is that process that once you've identified a candidate that you think is interested or qualified, you know, in a role, you know, what is that process that you guys are going through, or that you are, at least in the areas that you touch, to help identify, to make sure that they are going to be that good culture match, that they're not going to be that toxic person who's going to create a lot of challenges? You know, what are those steps or what's the processes or techniques that you found successful throughout your career or where you're at today?
Yeah, I would say it's evolved over time. If I think early days of hiring, it was often all about skill sets and capability.
Yeah.
And you often would have candidates interviewed by the leadership of that team or department that they were going to be a part of. But you didn't stretch outside of it. You didn't look at cross-functional leaders and things as part of that process. And it's something that we learned that if you really want to get people that are a fit culturally, you need to assess both the capability, but also the character of the
Mhm.
individual. And so that's something that we really key in on. And we encourage lunches, dinners, things to really get to know the individuals as they're going through the process. And it's okay. And we often will prep folks that when we're bringing them in to do the interviewing, this is not for you to decide whether or not they have the skill sets. They wouldn't have
Yeah.
made it to you if they don't have the skill sets. This is really about understanding who they are as people. Do they help shape us not for the organization we are today, but the organization that we are headed towards? And most importantly, do they have the character that will continue to build and fit with our culture as an organization?
So how do you get the different leaders aligned with that? I mean, so there's these, capabilities, experiences, skills, I guess that, those are kind of sometimes often very necessary things we need to assess for. And then you have this cultural and more intangibles, leadership skills, people skills, cultural fit type of skills. So you talked about, lunches, other interactions, but how do you get the leaders aligned, right? I could see three or four different people interviewing a candidate all coming back together and be like, oh, they're great, or is there, anything you guys are using to kind of make that more systematic or focused so that we're not just like, oh yeah, good, or oh no.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's an element, and that doesn't do anyone any good to
Yeah.
just say they're great.
Yeah.
And this is about us shaping our team and what we deliver. And, I think we are all aligned on who we want to be and who we want to stand for. And so there is a responsibility that we expect of these leaders to invest the time. And if they're gonna pencil whip the conversation or just tell us everything's great, then they're not going to be part of the process going forward. So
Mm.
I would say it's more of an expectation and responsibility to find the right people. I wish I could say that we had a formal process or the check boxes or the structured interview questions. And I know many people do, but this is about getting in there and asking honest questions and scenarios and getting to know them as people and how they operate. And I would say really paying attention to the details. Like we often will, if our executive assistant goes and gets them from the lobby, we'll ask her, like, what were the conversations in the elevators? Were they
Yeah.
engaged? Did they care about you and who you were and the role you have within the organization? How do they interact with individuals in the hallway? It's
Yeah.
just it's paying attention to it is truly their character.
Yeah.
And it's if you're a sponge and you notice the small things, they're often pretty significant tell signs for you.
Yeah, I love that. I always tell people the micro interactions you have with the candidate in and throughout a hiring process, like that. Hey, that journey from the lobby to the conference room or whatever, and the people that they run into, or those phone calls that an HR person or recruiter has or a hiring manager has. Hey, candidate, love to get you to the next interview. What questions do you have? That micro, that's a 3 or 5 minute phone conversation a lot of times. And you have often a lot of those throughout a hiring process, these little interactions that occur, and you learn a lot about people in those interactions. So if you over automate those, or you're doing it via email or text message, and you're not having the human connection piece that occurs,
Mhm.
then you miss out on some of that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the postmortem too. We don't always get it right.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important exit interviews, talking as leadership teams, talking to individuals. Were there signs that we missed and how do we get better? Because it's disruptive to the organization, but also the individual joining the team.
Yeah.
We are not here to, we want nothing but positive momentum, and we want people to feel like they're part of the family from day one, and we want them to feel that success. And when we miss, we take it very personally, and we want to make sure that we're refining the process and getting better and looking for some of those tell signs. And you're not always going to get them, but just investing that time and having the discussions both before people join, but also when they leave.
Yeah. And in that, you said a key point. This has got to be a great opportunity for that individual. And this is why one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you, because you're obviously somebody who's gone into organizations multiple times now, and you've shown a lot of growth. And this is kind of more of a personal question. It's not, I mean, like, I got to imagine you love what you do, right? I mean, like somebody who has that kind of longevity with an organization and somebody who grows with an organization, could you provide a little bit of color on like just how you felt throughout maybe your most recent part of your career and your growth there? I mean, just as a candidate, as an employee, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I would say leaders are collector of experiences.
Yeah.
They were all very different experiences for me as I look at Home Depot and the fortune I had of different roles. There were a lot of lateral roles that came with that. It was a willingness to just
But a lateral
dig in
role is
and
a
learn.
new challenge and a new growth opportunity,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so it really allowed me to create a strong foundation, having lived within different parts of the organization. And those lateral moves are often easier earlier in career than
Yeah.
when you start to get at a higher level, just because there's a risk profile to it, to the
Mm.
organization to jump off and do something different.
Yeah. Well,
If I think
or
about the
even for you as an
yeah,
executive, like you don't want your career derailed because you went from head of marketing to head of sales or something. I think I saw that somewhere in your career, right?
yeah.
I mean, if you're not, you got a learning curve there. I mean, does at like CRH, for example, I mean, did they set you up for success there? I mean, they don't want you to fail, but you don't want to fail either, but it wasn't going to be an easy road one way or the other, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, sincere gratitude to many, many people around the
Yeah.
organization. I think one of the coolest parts about CRH and Oldcastle is that it is a family of families.
Yeah.
As a large acquirer of businesses, we have folks. My first boss when I joined here was a fourth generation concrete guy. And
Mhm.
so I just think that is so cool. And he entertained every question I had around the business and walked me and introduced me to many, many people. As you can imagine, it's a relationship business. And so I think that I have tremendous gratitude for those that were able to teach me the industry and make those warm connections. But when I started, it was a whole rebuild. I mean, I didn't know people within the organization. They were a vendor to
Yeah.
Home Depot. So it was
Yeah.
a loose connection. But I think one of the things that's coolest about my journey here is I think I'm in my sixth role here. Every single one of them was a newly created role based on an opportunity that I found. I never once
Mhm.
interviewed for a role. I didn't backfill anyone in the role. They were truly the evolution of our organization as it scaled and new opportunities were discovered. And I just continued to take on a little bit more or turn a little to the right or the
Mm.
left, whether it be
Yeah.
leaning towards marketing or sales or innovation, but just an ultimate culmination of really being a collaborator and bringing a lot of functions together in what had grown to be quite a big organization.
So I wanted to punctuate that and let you tell that your story a little bit there, because I think that's the goal that we should have for every person we bring into our organization, right? And to be able to create your experience and to allow everybody to be rewarded and challenged and have the growth that somebody like you has had in your career. And, so whatever we can do to facilitate that with the people that we're hiring, that's going to be, really, really important. And I think that's just the trend that you see with people who are very successful or with very successful organizations in general. They've always create these opportunities for people to grow, even if it's lateral, because that is, I mean, if you sit in a role for a long time, it can get boring, frankly, right? And I want you, as humans, we want, especially high performing humans, really, they're looking for that next challenge. So I like that you created the next challenge for yourself. And obviously, leadership was supportive of that, right?
Yeah, and I think you hit on an important point though, is not everybody wants that journey.
Yeah.
And I do think that it is, as leaders, we owe it to our teams to have the one-on-one conversations and to understand what they deem successful.
Hmm.
And, oftentimes, and, I think about it a lot, I have over promoted folks, and then been left with the consequences of not seeing them succeed,
Yeah.
or pushed people out of the organization unknowingly because I have a high bar and they were a top performer and I assumed that they wanted more and they didn't.
Yeah.
And then there's others that you aren't clear enough about succession planning and opportunity, and you are a little too late when you come to them with that next role or that next opportunity. So all scenarios exist, but I think it's just, can you create the trust and candor with the individuals on your team to have those honest conversations and deliver that message and understand where they sit?
And you're doing that in the beginning of the process by having them interview with such a wide, diverse group of leaders within the organization, not just their direct reports, so that they kind of take that concept full circle, right? I think
Mhm.
is really, really important. Is there anything else that you all are doing that you feel like is, a really effective tool or strategy to help make sure that you are bringing people in that have the best chance of being successful for themselves and for the organization, that you think that it would be worth sharing with everybody?
Sure. I'd go back to, it's kind of a fun example. So I was just recently listening to Carol Tomei talk, who's now CEO at UPS and was CFO when I was at Home Depot. And I worked at a distance with her,
Yeah.
right? So I always respected her. But she was sharing a story about how, what her experiences were like across different CEOs at Home Depot. And, she had the opportunity to live through the journey of Frank Blake going back to what Arthur Blank had built around this inverted pyramid.
Yeah.
And that it is all about putting those that are belly to belly with the customer at the forefront of the conversations. It's not about the executives, they come afterwards.
Mm.
And, when she talked about that and how she brought that culture to UPS, in a weird way, it almost gave me permission to think about the same organizationally for us. And as we acquire and scale and grow, we have to be so intentional about focusing on our frontline team and those
Mhm.
that are belly to belly with the customer, and we can get lost. And where I'm going with that is, it doesn't matter what level you're coming into the organization at. You need to go be in a plant, you need to go walk our stores, you need to go visit with our dealers and distributors, and you need to live and be humbled by the folks that really drive our business. And I
Yeah.
think that that's something outside of an interview process. It's part of your onboarding is being very aware of the people who move the business forward and making sure that you never lose that level of connectivity. So whether it live as an inverted pyramid, whether it live as the heartbeat of the organization, whatever
Yeah.
badge you want to put on it, the character I'm looking for is the one that is never above going and walking a plant and working alongside the individual running the tumbler or servicing our customers in the aisle or picking up the phone for our customer service organization.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to stay connected at all
Close.
levels.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think Home Depot I think did a really great job of that, and you guys are obviously really hyper focused on that, and that I think is a big piece of it. I think that is part of the reason why we have these conversations. There are a tremendous number of trades and frontline people who work in the construction industry, right? And the organizations that are doing what you're doing, where you're focused on them first. How are we, how are we making this the best opportunity? How can we have empathy and understanding for what they're doing and put ourselves in their shoes and as the leaders go out and spend time with those. I mean, I know, I ran a commercial dish machine company. As a leader, I spent a minimum of 1 day a week out in the field with my people doing all those things, working in the manufacturing facility, making, soap and dish machines. We were out there wearing the blues, not wearing fancy suits or nothing, right? We were out there every single day. And that served multiple purposes. One, we built relationships and rapport at people at every level. We'd always go out to lunch or whatever, that'd be an opportunity to get to know that person at a different level. And that really helps solidify culture ultimately too,
Yeah.
right? If you're trying to, mandate culture from an ivory tower, like it just doesn't work, I don't think, right?
Right.
Not
But
very,
it brings you energy. Like it is so cool.
yeah,
Every time I go out there and meet with customers and walk our plants, I come back with one such, admiration for the talent within the organization, but also just a drive to get even better. I think we're
yeah.
an incredible organization, but there's always areas for improvement. And if you want to learn where you can get better, the closer you can get to the customer and those frontline employees, the more you're going to know about where the problems really sit.
Yeah. So go to spend a day out in the field with your folks, right? And
Yeah.
do that, once a week or every month, and make it a point to do that. And that's a really great way. And I think that's a great way post hire. So we always talk about this hiring process is there's a focus piece. This is like when you're preparing to find folks, like, we clear about who we're looking for and what good will look like a year from now once they're hired. I think people forget that step. And then how do we attract people? We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but there's all sorts of tactics there. And how do we evaluate folks effectively? But the training and onboarding piece, I think people mistake that as that is part of the hiring process, right? For the first year they're on the job, you're still hiring them, right? In many
Yeah.
cases. And in
I
the
do think one thing too, real quick on
yeah,
that, because you were mentioning, when we go through the hiring process and you had made the comment that you're hiring for kind of who's right for even a year from now or 5 years from now or whatever
yeah,
that is, every time we have turnover of some kind, it does give you an opportunity to revisit the role in which you're hiring
mm,
for.
yeah,
And I do think it's so important to read through the job description. Do not just pass it along for the ease of posting. Really think about those, the mandatory skill sets, the
yeah,
preferred qualifications. Oftentimes you can miss on great talent because you've become overly prescriptive on some of those points. And I think the shorter we can make it and the broader we can bring in a pool of candidates to really talk with them and understand capabilities and see the talent that's out there and how we can evolve each and every position to set us up for the future is really important.
that is a really, really important point. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think so many organizations, they just recycle the job description
Mhm.
over and over again. And it really, what you're talking about is a form of what we call a job analysis, right? You're rethinking about the job and what's expected and, what are the attributes that matter. Now, another piece of that is, are we defining what good looks like well enough? Was it even defined to begin with?
Yeah.
And so, but hopefully it was. But if that person in that role didn't make it, they weren't successful. First of all, it's our fault, by the way, right? We put them in that role, right? We
Mhm.
allowed them, or, as job candidates want jobs, right? So they're going to do their best to sell themselves. And you could blame it on them for, applying or wanting a job or taking a job that they shouldn't have taken. But It's our job to make sure that we're setting that person up for success. And we do that by it really begins with clearly defining what good looks like in hopefully clear and measurable terms, right? And oftentimes when you have that churn, doing what you just said, go back, revisit that job description and say, look, the expectations were not clear or they were
Mm-hmm.
totally wrong. We actually changed them along the
Mm-hmm.
way. And we never really formally revisited that or had even a conversation with Fletcher about that. We just changed his expectations and just said, good luck, right?
Yes.
So I think that's that focus point, those are the focal point and the training and onboarding point. I often see some of the biggest failures in the hiring process. The other tactics, we have tools and we manage with those, and there are things we can do better there, but we manage to figure those out somehow, right? These two pieces we just skip past too often, right? Okay, you're hired.
Yeah.
Good luck. Right?
Yeah. But I think you're hitting on a life lesson. I mean, we're talking about it in the sense of hiring, but
Yeah.
the reality is it is much easier to point the finger and just say that someone wasn't good or they didn't work hard enough, or it is a lot harder to really look in the mirror and figure out where you had culpability in that
Yeah.
process. Where did you miss on questions? Where did you miss on opportunity assessment, clarity and goals, et cetera? And I think that's the only way we get better as individuals, as leaders, as team members, is to make sure that when things don't go the way that we want them to go, that there is that moment of reflection of what could we have done differently, and not just put it on that individual.
Yeah. And I'm glad you punctuate that, because I think, here far too often, it's always the other person's fault, right? And we're not looking enough inwardly on what our role was in that as a leader or a team member. Well, that's really great. Jenny, I've really enjoyed this conversation. How can folks get connected with you? Who's your ideal customer? If somebody is looking for a career opportunity, what does your ideal candidate look like? And how do they get in touch with you guys or you?
So there was a lot there, but Jenny Nail, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Hammer and a Nail. How fun is that? And I have a philosophy that we're always interviewing. So do not wait for a posting. I would welcome a conversation. So feel free to message me, reach out. And if I'm not the right person, happy to redirect you. The beauty of being an Atlanta native is that I have quite the network here. And so if Oldcastle or CRH is not the right fit at this time, happy to help connect you in. I think this is, as we started, it's very much a world of relationships and network. And so happy to play any role I can in that. As far as talent and what we're looking for, we're always looking for ambition, curiosity. And as I mentioned, I can't underscore enough, just, are you a good person? And do you fit the culture? And can you put the customer first and really care about your employees and the work that you do? I can teach you most of the skill sets that are out there, or the team can, but really, how do you show up each and every day? And is your heart in the right place in terms of what you're doing?
Awesome. Jenny, we'll make sure your LinkedIn profile's on all the show notes. And of course, people can go visit your websites as well. And I really, really, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to our People First Builders podcast. If you're a successful construction CEO and would like to tell your story on this program, please visit our podcast homepage, FletcherWimbush.com/peoplefirstbuilders, or check it out in the notes below. If you got something out of this interview and would like to share the episode on socials, we always appreciate that. Just take a quick screenshot with your phone, text it to a friend, or post it to the socials. If you know someone who might be a great guest, tag them on social and let them know. And don't forget, #PeopleFirstBuilders. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We're regularly putting out new content. To make sure that you don't miss out on any episodes, go ahead and hit subscribe on your favorite podcast channel. Your thumbs up and ratings and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, FletcherWimbush.com, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.